I stared at the recipe card in my trembling hands, written in my own careful script 17 years ago. Marcus's favorite pot roast, the way to a man's heart. Across the kitchen island, my husband Marcus stood with his phone pressed to his ear, whispering sweet reassurances to someone who definitely wasn't me. "Don't worry, baby. She makes the most incredible lasagna. I'll bring you some tomorrow after the family dinner." The words hit me like a physical blow. 17 years of Sunday dinners, holiday feasts, birthday cakes, and midnight snacks. 17 years of learning every family member's favorite dish, accommodating allergies, dietary restrictions, and finicky preferences. 17 years of my life spent in this kitchen, perfecting recipes that had become the cornerstone of the Donnelly family gatherings. And now Marcus was promising to take my food, my creations, my labor of love, to feed his mistress. I set the recipe card down, slowly, my hands surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. The kitchen around me told the story of nearly 2 decades of devotion. Handwritten recipe cards organized in a wooden box Marcus had given me for our 2nd anniversary. Copper pots seasoned with years of use. A well-worn cookbook collection featuring notes in the margins about which dishes worked best for which occasions. This wasn't just a kitchen, it was a shrine to my dedication to this family. Marcus ended his call and turned to me with that practiced smile he'd been using lately. The one that never quite reached his eyes anymore. "Sorry about that, honey. Work call that couldn't wait." He moved toward me, reaching for the list I'd been preparing for tomorrow's family dinner. "So, what's the menu looking like? Mom mentioned she's bringing the new neighbors she wants everyone to meet." I looked at him. Really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time in months. When had his lies become so effortless? When had I become so invisible to him that he felt comfortable conducting his affair literally in front of me? The man I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago had been genuine, passionate about his work as a contractor, proud of the life we were building together. This version of Marcus, sleek in his expensive shirts and constantly glued to his phone, felt like a stranger wearing my husband's face. "The usual," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. "Your mother requested her birthday cake, even though it's not her birthday. Janet wants me to make extra portions of the green bean casserole because her kids refuse to eat vegetables anywhere else. And your brother David specifically asked for those dinner rolls with the herb butter that takes 3 hours to make properly." Marcus nodded absently, already checking his phone again. "Sounds perfect. You always know exactly what everyone wants." The casual dismissal in his tone, the assumption that I would simply continue performing my role without question, sparked something dangerous in my chest. "Do I?" I asked quietly. He glanced up, momentarily focused. "Do you what?" "Know exactly what everyone wants." Marcus laughed, the sound hollow in the spacious kitchen we'd renovated 5 years ago specifically to accommodate larger family gatherings. "Of course you do. You're amazing at this stuff, Elena. Everyone always says so. Mom tells all her friends about your cooking. Janet brings people to family dinners just to show off your food. You've got this whole domestic goddess thing down to an art form." Domestic goddess. The phrase sat bitter on my tongue. For 17 years, I had embraced that role, found genuine joy in creating meals that brought people together, in seeing faces light up when they tasted something I'd spent hours perfecting. I'd turned down promotions at the marketing firm where I worked part-time, keeping my career deliberately small so I could focus on what I thought mattered more, being the heart of this family's gatherings. But as I watched Marcus text someone, his thumbs moving quickly across the screen, I realized that my domestic goddess status had become a trap. I wasn't a person with my own dreams and ambitions. I was a service provider. A highly skilled, unpaid caterer who happened to live in the house and share the bed of the man who benefited most from her labor. "Who are you texting?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't get a straight answer. "David. Confirming what time he's coming tomorrow." Marcus tucked his phone into his pocket, but not before I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Sophia. Not David. Never David. Always Sophia these days. The lies had started small 6 months ago. Working late became working weekends. Business. Dinners became business trips. Phone calls that couldn't wait became hushed conversations in other rooms. I'd noticed, of course, but I'd explained it away. Marcus's construction company was expanding. The economy was good for their business. He was under stress, working longer hours, dealing with demanding clients. But standing in my kitchen, holding a recipe card that represented just one small piece of the enormous effort I'd invested in this marriage, I finally acknowledged what I'd been refusing to see. Marcus wasn't just having an affair. He was living a completely separate life, one where I existed only as the person who made sure he had good food to share with his real priority. I should start the prep work for tomorrow, I said, moving toward the refrigerator. Your mother specifically requested that I make the appetizer spread from Janet's birthday last month. The one with the bacon-wrapped scallops and the spinach artichoke dip. The one that took you 6 hours to make? Marcus asked, suddenly paying attention. 7 hours, actually, if you count the shopping time. I pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, laying them out on the marble countertop. But it's what she wants, so it's what she'll get. Marcus watched me work for a moment, something almost like guilt flickering across his features. You know, Elena, you don't have to knock yourself out for every family gathering. We could order catering sometimes, or ask other people to contribute more. I paused, a package of bacon in my hands. In 17 years, Marcus had never once suggested scaling back my contributions to family meals. His mother, Dorothy, would be horrified at the suggestion of catering. His siblings had become accustomed to elaborate spreads that showcased my skills. The entire family identity was built around these gatherings where I provided the foundation that brought everyone together. Your family expects certain things, I replied carefully, and I deliver them. That's how this works. I know, but maybe his phone buzzed, cutting off whatever half-hearted gesture toward consideration he'd been about to make. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The brief moment of attention he'd been paying me evaporated as his focus redirected toward whatever message he'd received. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward his study. It's important. I watched him disappear down the hallway, closing the door behind him with the careful precision of someone who needed privacy for his conversation. The silence in the kitchen felt enormous, filled with the weight of years of accumulated resentment I'd been too busy, too dedicated, too invested in my role to acknowledge. I opened the package of bacon and began separating strips, laying them out on the cutting board with methodical precision. 17 years of family dinners stretched behind me like a timeline of my own diminishing importance. I remembered the early gatherings when Marcus would help me cook, when we'd work together in the kitchen, laughing and talking while we prepared meals for his family. When had that partnership dissolved into this one-sided arrangement where I provided all the labor while he provided only the expectation that I would continue? The progression had been so gradual I'd barely noticed it happening. Marcus's mother, Dorothy, had started making specific requests. Could I make that delicious soup again? Would it be possible to have those cookies from last time? His sister, Janet, began bringing friends to show off the elaborate spreads. His brother David started mentioning my cooking to his coworkers, building up expectations for what family gatherings should include. Each request had felt like appreciation, like validation, of skills I'd developed with genuine enthusiasm. I'd loved learning new techniques, perfecting recipes, creating memorable experiences around food. But somewhere along the way, appreciation had transformed into entitlement. My cooking had become an expected service rather than a generous gift, and now Marcus was taking that service, those skills, that dedication, and sharing it with someone else. Someone who got the benefits of my labor without any of the obligations, expectations, or family drama that came with being Mrs. Marcus Donnelly. I could hear his voice from the study, warm and affectionate in a way it hadn't been with me in months. I know, baby. Tomorrow's going to be long, but I'll make it up to you. Maybe I can bring dinner over afterward. Elena always makes way too much food anyway. Always makes way too much food. As if the elaborate spreads I created were accidental overproduction, rather than carefully calculated abundance designed to ensure everyone left satisfied and happy. As if feeding his entire extended family for 17 years had been some kind of hobby I indulged in for my own entertainment. I finished arranging the bacon and moved on to preparing the scallops, cleaning and wrapping each one with the precise technique I'd perfected through years of practice. My hands moved automatically through familiar motions while my mind raced. Through implications I'd been avoiding for months. Marcus wasn't just betraying our marriage. He was stealing from me, taking the fruits of my labor and my love and redistributing them to someone who hadn't earned them, didn't deserve them, and probably didn't even appreciate the skill and effort they represented. But more than that, he was erasing me. In his conversations with Sophia, I existed only as a source of good food, not as a partner, not as a woman with my own thoughts and feelings and dreams, but as a convenient domestic service that happened to share his address. The realization should have broken me. For months, I'd been bracing myself for the inevitable. Discovery, the confrontation, the tearful breakdown that would follow learning definitively about Marcus's affair. But standing in my kitchen, surrounded by the tools and ingredients of my own exploitation, I felt something else entirely. Something cold and calculating and surprisingly energizing. Marcus thought he knew me. His family thought they knew me. They all saw Elena Donnelly, the devoted wife and sister-in-law and daughter-in-law, who could be counted on to provide elaborate meals and endless hospitality. They saw someone who derived her entire identity from serving others, someone whose greatest ambition was to make sure everyone else was fed and happy. They had no idea who I really was beneath that carefully constructed image. They didn't know about the marketing degree I'd earned summa cum laude, or the strategic thinking skills I'd developed during my brief but successful career before I'd chosen to scale back for family priorities. They didn't know about the business, ideas I'd quietly researched and developed, the professional network I'd maintained even while focusing primarily on domestic responsibilities. Most importantly, they had no idea that after 17 years of managing complex family dynamics, coordinating elaborate events, and ensuring everyone's needs were met simultaneously, I had developed exactly the skills necessary to orchestrate their downfall with the same methodical precision I brought to planning holiday menus. Marcus emerged from his study 40 minutes later, his mood noticeably improved after his extended conversation with Sophia. He found me in the kitchen, still working on tomorrow's preparations, surrounded by organized chaos that would transform into an impressive feast by the following evening. "Still at it?" he asked, moving to the refrigerator for a beer. "You're going to exhaust yourself before the family even gets here." "I'm fine," I replied, not looking up from the vegetables I was chopping for the 7-layer salad Dorothy had specifically requested. "This is what I do." Marcus opened his beer and leaned against the counter, watching me work. "You know, Elena, I've been thinking. Maybe after the expansion project is finished, we should take a vacation. Somewhere tropical. Just the two of us." I paused in my chopping, considering this unexpected olive branch. 6 months ago, I would have been thrilled by the suggestion. I would have started planning immediately, researching destinations and making lists of activities we could enjoy together. Now, I heard the guilt beneath the offer, the attempt to assuage his conscience without actually changing his behavior. "That sounds nice," I said neutrally. "When do you think the project will be finished?" "Another few months, probably. These commercial developments always take longer than expected." He moved closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know I've been distracted lately. Work's been crazy. But things will settle down soon." The touch that once would have comforted me now felt like a performance, a gesture designed to maintain the status quo rather than genuine affection. I continued chopping vegetables with steady precision, not pulling away, but not leaning into his touch either. I understand, I said simply. And I did understand, more clearly than Marcus could possibly imagine. I understood that his promises were empty, his guilt was temporary, and his assumption that I would continue accepting this situation indefinitely was about to prove catastrophically wrong. But I also understood something else, something that filled me with the first genuine excitement I'd felt in months. After 17 years of perfecting the art of giving everyone exactly what they wanted, I was finally going to focus on what I wanted. And what I wanted was for Marcus Donnelly to discover that taking me for granted had been the biggest mistake of his life. Tomorrow's family dinner was going to be perfect, just as always. But it was also going to be the beginning of the end of everything Marcus thought he could count on. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Marcus slept beside me, his breathing deep and undisturbed, one arm flung carelessly across the space where I should have been lying. Instead, I sat on the edge of our bed, watching the man who had shared my life for 20 years, and felt nothing but cold assessment. This was the man who had promised to cherish and honor me, who had stood in front of our families and friends, and vowed to forsake all others, who had built a life on the foundation of my unwavering support and dedication, only to hand pieces of that life to another woman like party favors. I moved through my morning routine with mechanical precision, making coffee in the kitchen where I'd discovered his betrayal the night before. The recipe box sat on the counter where I'd left it, a testament to 2 decades of accumulated expertise. Each card represented hours of trial and error, adjustments and refinements, the kind of patient development that created true mastery. Marcus had always taken that mastery for granted. When we were first married, he'd brag to his friends about my cooking, showing me off like a prize he'd won. "Look what I got," his attitude had suggested. A beautiful woman who can also make incredible food. But over the years, the bragging had faded into expectation. My skills had become part of the landscape of his life, as reliable and unremarkable as running water or electricity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dorothy, Marcus's mother. "Elena, dear, I hope you haven't forgotten about the special appetizer I mentioned. And would it be possible to make extra dinner rolls? I've invited the Hendersons, and Patricia has such refined tastes." Patricia Henderson. I knew the type without meeting her. Another member of Dorothy's social circle who would sample my food, compliment my efforts, and file away my recipes as conversation pieces for her own gatherings. Another person who would benefit from my labor without contributing anything in return. I typed back a polite confirmation, already calculating the additional time and ingredients required. The Hendersons would expect the same level of quality and presentation as family members, which meant expanding every dish proportionally while maintaining perfect execution. What had been a 7-hour preparation day had just become 9 hours. Marcus wandered into the kitchen an hour later, showered and dressed for work, expecting his usual breakfast of fresh fruit, yogurt, and the homemade granola I prepared in weekly batches. I had everything ready and waiting, same as always, the picture of domestic efficiency. "You're up early," he observed, settling at the breakfast bar with his coffee. "Couldn't sleep. I wanted to get a head start on today's preparations," I replied, placing his breakfast in front of him. "Your mother added the Hendersons to the guest list, so I need to adjust everything accordingly." Marcus nodded absently, scrolling through emails on his phone while he ate. The casual indifference to my increased workload was so characteristic I almost smiled. In Marcus's world, food simply appeared when he needed it, prepared to his exact preferences without any consideration of the effort required. "Don't forget I might be a little late tonight," he said without looking up. "I need to check on the Riverside project after work, making sure the subcontractors are staying on schedule. The Riverside project." I'd heard him mention it several times recently, always as an excuse for delayed arrivals home or extended weekend work sessions. I wondered if Sophia knew she was being used as cover for a fictional construction site, or if she simply didn't care as long as she got her share of Marcus's attention. "Of course," I said smoothly. "Dinner's at 6, but I'll keep a plate warm for you." "Thanks, babe. You're the best." He kissed my cheek in passing, a perfunctory gesture that had once made my heart flutter and now left me feeling nothing but mild disgust. After Marcus left for work, I stood in the empty kitchen and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I wasn't going to confront him about Sophia. I wasn't going to demand explanations or issue ultimatums or break down in tears. Instead, I was going to do what I did best. I was going to plan. But this time, I wasn't planning a menu or a celebration or a family gathering. I was planning the systematic dismantling of Marcus Donnelly's comfortable assumptions about his life. I started with what I knew. Marcus's construction company, Donnelly Development, had grown significantly over the past 5 years. What had begun as a small residential renovation business now handled major commercial projects throughout the region. The expansion had been Marcus's greatest professional achievement, and he was immensely proud of the reputation he'd built for quality, work, and reliable service. That reputation depended heavily on relationships, clients who trusted Marcus's recommendations, subcontractors who prioritized his projects because he paid on time and treated them fairly, city officials who expedited permits because they knew Donnelly Development delivered results. The entire network of professional connections that made Marcus's business successful required constant maintenance and cultivation, and for the past 5 years, I had been instrumental in that cultivation, though Marcus had never acknowledged it directly. The dinner parties where potential clients met our family and saw Marcus as a stable, trustworthy businessman, the charity events where I networked with city council members' wives and learned about upcoming development opportunities, the holiday gifts I selected and sent to key contacts, always signed with both our names, but chosen and purchased entirely by me. Marcus thought his professional success was due to his own skills and hard work. He had no idea how much of it depended on the image of stability and respectability that I provided, or how quickly that image could be undermined if I chose to withdraw my support. I pulled out my laptop and opened a spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for years without really thinking about its strategic value. Contact information for everyone in Marcus's professional network, organized by relationship type and importance level. Clients, subcontractors, suppliers, city officials, bank contacts, insurance agents, names, phone numbers, email addresses, personal details about families and interests. I'd created this database to help with Marcus's business entertaining, to ensure I remembered which client's daughter was getting married or which subcontractor's son was starting college. But looking at it now, I saw something entirely different. I saw a comprehensive map of Marcus's professional vulnerabilities. My phone rang, interrupting my analysis. Janet, Marcus's sister, calling with the inevitable last-minute requests that always accompanied family gatherings. "Elena, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I just remembered that Kevin is bringing his new girlfriend tonight. She's vegetarian, and I completely forgot to mention it yesterday. Is there any way you could add some vegetarian options?" I finished. "Of course, Janet. I'll make sure she has plenty to choose from." "You're an angel. I don't know how you manage to accommodate everyone's needs so effortlessly. Kevin's been raving about your cooking since he started dating her, building up expectations. I'd hate for her first family dinner to be disappointing. Kevin's new girlfriend. Another person being brought to sample my food, to be impressed by the elaborate spread I would provide, to form opinions about the Donnelly family based on my efforts. Another person who would benefit from my labor while Marcus got the credit for being part of such a welcoming, well-organized family. Don't worry about it, I assured Janet. I'll take care of everything. After ending the call, I returned to my laptop and opened a new document. If I was going to accommodate Kevin's girlfriend properly, I needed to plan additional dishes that would showcase my skills while meeting her dietary requirements. But more importantly, I needed to think strategically about this gathering and what it represented. Tonight's dinner would include Marcus's parents, his siblings, and their families, the new neighbors Dorothy wanted to impress, the Hendersons with their refined tastes, and now Kevin's vegetarian girlfriend. 14 people total, each with different expectations and preferences, all of which I was expected to meet seamlessly while making it look effortless. 14 people who took my contributions for granted. 14 people who had never once offered to help with preparation or cleanup. 14 people who would compliment the food, thank Marcus for hosting, and drive home without giving a single thought to the woman who had made their enjoyable evening possible. But also 14 people who could serve as witnesses to whatever I decided to reveal about Marcus's character. Spent the next several hours in focused preparation, not just for the evening's meal, but for a longer-term strategy that was taking shape in my mind. The cooking was automatic, muscle memory developed through years of practice. My hands moved through familiar motions while my brain worked on more complex problems. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen smelled like heaven and looked like a war zone. Every surface was covered with dishes in various stages of completion. The appetizer spread Dorothy had requested covered 2 full platters. The vegetarian options for Kevin's girlfriend included 3 separate entrees and 2 sides. The regular menu featured everyone's favorites, plus several new dishes I'd been wanting to try. It was the kind of elaborate production that had become my signature, the reason family members brought guests to show off what Elena could accomplish. But for the first time in 17 years, I wasn't cooking out of love or even obligation. I was cooking as a demonstration of power. Marcus arrived home at 5:30, 30 minutes before guests were due to arrive. He walked into the kitchen and stopped short, taking in the organized chaos of my preparations. Jesus, Elena, this looks incredible. You've outdone yourself again. He moved through the kitchen, sampling from various dishes, nodding approval. Mom's going to flip when she sees this spread. And the Hendersons, Patricia's going to be so impressed. I watched him taste my food, compliment my work, and assume ownership of the impression it would make on his guests. The casual entitlement was so ingrained he didn't even recognize it as entitlement. In Marcus's mind, this was simply how things worked. Elena cooked, guests were impressed, and he received credit for being married to someone so talented. There's been a change of plans, I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Kevin's bringing his vegetarian girlfriend, so I've added some additional options. Of course you did. Marcus moved to embrace me, probably motivated by genuine appreciation for my flexibility. What would this family do without you? The question hung in the air between us, more loaded than he realized. What would this family do without me? What would Marcus do without the foundation of domestic stability I provided? What would happen to his comfortable assumptions if I simply stopped playing my assigned role? I guess we'll never have to find out, I replied, allowing him to hold me while calculating exactly how much longer that assumption would prove accurate. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he immediately released me to check the message. His expression softened as he read, the same look of affection that had been missing from his interactions with me for months. Everything okay? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yeah, just work stuff. Nothing urgent. He tucked the phone away, but not before I glimpsed Sophia's name on the screen again. I should go get changed before everyone arrives. As Marcus headed upstairs, I returned to my final preparations with renewed focus. Tonight's dinner was going to be perfect, just as Marcus expected, but it was also going to be the last time. He could take my perfection for granted without understanding what it cost him. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, marking the beginning of what would be the most important performance of my life. Not just the performance of being the perfect hostess, but the performance of being the devoted wife whose husband had no idea what he was about to lose. The Donnelly family gathered in our dining room like actors taking their familiar positions on a well-rehearsed stage. Dorothy held court at one end of the table, resplendent in her burgundy silk blouse and pearl necklace, already regaling the Hendersons with stories about Marcus's childhood achievements. David and his wife Sarah corralled their twin boys while trying to maintain adult conversation. Janet fussed over Kevin's new girlfriend, a petite brunette named Michelle, who seemed overwhelmed by the sheer volume of food I'd prepared. I moved between the kitchen and dining room with practiced efficiency, ensuring water glasses stayed full and serving dishes remained stocked. From years of hosting these gatherings, I'd developed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Dorothy's wine glass never emptied. The children's plates received second helpings before they could ask. Extra napkins appeared wherever small disasters threatened to occur. "Elena, this spinach artichoke dip is absolutely divine," Patricia Henderson announced, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "You simply must give me the recipe. I'm hosting the garden club next month, and this would be perfect." I smiled graciously while internally calculating how many times I'd heard similar requests over the years. Hundreds of people had asked for my recipes, as if the secret to good cooking could be transmitted through a list of ingredients and basic instructions. They never understood that recipes were just starting points. The real art lay in timing, technique, and the kind of intuitive understanding that came only through repetition and genuine care. "Of course," I replied. "I'll email it to you tomorrow." Marcus beamed at his end of the table, basking in reflected glory. "Elena's always been generous with her recipes. Haven't you, babe? Remember when you taught Janet how to make those dinner rolls?" Janet laughed, raising her wine glass. "Taught is a generous term. I think attempted to teach would be more accurate. They still don't turn out like Elena's, no matter how carefully I follow her instructions." "That's because Elena has magic hands," Dorothy declared, gesturing grandly with her fork. "Some people are just born with culinary gifts. It's a blessing. Really, for the entire family. A blessing." I continued serving while pondering Dorothy's choice of words. In her mind, my cooking abilities were indeed a blessing, but specifically a blessing bestowed upon her family. Not a skill I'd developed through years of study and practice. Not a talent I chose to share out of love and generosity, simply a natural gift that conveniently served their needs. "Elena's definitely spoiled us all," David added, cutting into the herb-crusted salmon I'd prepared specifically because I knew it was his favorite. "My kids won't eat fish anywhere else. They claim restaurant versions don't taste right." "That's because Elena uses fresh herbs from her garden and sources her salmon from that specialty market downtown," Sarah explained to Michelle, who was politely sampling everything on her plate. "She's incredibly particular about ingredients." Michelle nodded appreciatively. "Everything is delicious. Kevin wasn't exaggerating about the family dinners. This is like something you'd get at a high-end restaurant." "Better than most restaurants," Marcus corrected with obvious pride. "Elena's been perfecting these recipes for years. She's got this whole system worked out." A system. Another interesting word choice. Marcus saw my cooking not as creative expression or loving gesture, but as a systematic process that reliably produced desired outcomes. Like a machine that converted time and ingredients into social currency and family satisfaction. I excused myself to retrieve the second course, using the momentary privacy of the kitchen to center myself. Through the doorway, I could hear conversation flowing around topics I'd heard countless times before. Dorothy's upcoming cruise with her bridge club, David's promotion at the accounting firm, Janet's ongoing battle with her teenage daughters, attitude. The comfortable rhythms of family connection that I facilitated but rarely fully participated in. My phone, charging on the kitchen counter, displayed a notification that made me pause. A text message from an unknown number. "Thanks. Again for the amazing dinner last night. Marcus wasn't kidding about your lasagna. Hope to try more of your cooking soon. Sophia." I stared at the screen, processing this unexpected development. Somehow Sophia had gotten my phone number. Somehow she felt comfortable enough to text me directly, thanking me for food I'd prepared for her husband to share with her. The audacity was breathtaking, but also illuminating. This woman felt no shame about her affair with Marcus, no guilt about accepting food prepared by his wife. She was thanking me for my labor as if I were a catering service she'd hired rather than the woman whose marriage she was destroying. The complete lack of awareness, of basic human decency, told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person Marcus had chosen to betray me with. I screenshotted the message and saved it to a new folder on my phone labeled Documentation. Then I deleted the original text and returned to my hosting duties, carrying the main course platters with steady hands despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Perfect timing," Marcus announced as I set down the herb-crusted salmon. "I was just telling Mr. Henderson about the new commercial development we're working on downtown, the one near the waterfront." "Ah, yes, the Riverside project," Henderson replied with interest. "I've heard it's quite ambitious. Mixed-use development. With retail, office, and residential components?" "Exactly. It's the kind of project that could really put Donnelly Development on the map for major commercial work." Marcus's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. This project represented everything he'd worked toward professionally, the culmination of years of building reputation and credibility in the construction industry. I served dinner while listening to Marcus describe his vision for the development, his excitement about the architectural challenges, his pride in being selected for such a significant project. He spoke with the passion of someone who genuinely loved his work, who found real satisfaction in creating something meaningful and lasting. That passion reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him 20 years ago. Marcus had always been driven, ambitious in the best sense, committed to excellence in everything he built. The tragedy wasn't that he'd lost those qualities, but that he'd somehow compartmentalized them, separating his professional integrity from his personal behavior. "The timeline is aggressive," Marcus continued, "but we've got a great team assembled. If everything goes according to plan, we should break ground next month." "And the financing is all secured?" Henderson pressed, his banker's instincts engaging. "Absolutely. We've got solid backing from First National, plus private investors who believe in the project's potential." Marcus's confidence was absolute, built on months of careful preparation and relationship building. I knew about those relationships because I'd helped cultivate many of them. The dinner party where Marcus had first met the lead investor, the charity gala where he'd networked with city planning officials, the golf tournament where he'd solidified his partnership with the architectural firm. Behind each professional, connection was a social foundation that I'd helped create and maintain. But Marcus had no idea how fragile those foundations really were. He'd never considered how quickly professional relationships could shift when personal circumstances changed. He'd never thought about what might happen if his image as a stable, trustworthy businessman was somehow compromised. After dinner, as the family moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I began the familiar ritual of kitchen cleanup. It was a massive undertaking. Dishes from multiple courses, serving platters, wine glasses, the accumulated detritus of feeding 14 people an elaborate meal. The dishwasher would run 3 cycles before everything was clean. Janet appeared, in the doorway carrying a small stack of dessert plates. "Elena, that meal was absolutely incredible. Seriously, you outdid yourself tonight." "Thank you. I'm glad everyone enjoyed it." "Enjoyed it?" Patricia Henderson hasn't stopped raving about the salmon preparation, and Michelle was asking Kevin if all our family dinners are like this. Janet set the plates on the counter and lingered, something in her expression suggesting she had more to say. "Is everything all right?" I asked, continuing to load the dishwasher. Janet glanced toward the living room, then moved closer, lowering her voice. "Elena, can I ask you something? And please don't take this the wrong way." I paused in my cleanup, giving her my full attention. "Of course. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? You put so much effort into these gatherings, so much work into—" making everything perfect for everyone else. But sometimes I wonder if you're taking care of yourself too. The question caught me off guard, not because of its content, but because someone had finally asked it. In 17 years of family dinners, no one had ever inquired about my well-being beyond polite social pleasantries. Janet's concern seemed genuine, tinged with something that might have been guilt. "Why do you ask?" I said carefully. "I don't know. You seem different lately. More distant, maybe. And Marcus has been—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's been distracted recently, working a lot more, traveling more. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay between you two." Janet knew something. Not the details, perhaps, but she'd observed enough to recognize that something was wrong. Her question was both an offer of support and a fishing expedition, an attempt to understand dynamics she'd noticed, but couldn't quite identify. "Marriage has its ups and downs," I replied diplomatically. "Marcus has been under a lot of pressure. With the business expansion, it's temporary." Janet nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know I'm here, right? I know Mom can be overwhelming sometimes, and David's always focused on his own problems. But if you need a friend, I hope you know you can count on me." The offer was unexpected and touching, but also dangerous. Janet was trying to be kind, but she was still Marcus's sister, still part of the family system that had taken my contributions for granted for nearly 2 decades. Any confidence I shared with her would eventually find its way back to Marcus, filtered through family loyalty and good intentions. "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. "Really. You're very thoughtful." "I mean it, Elena. Sometimes I think we take you for granted. All of us. You do so much for this family, and we just expect it without thinking about what it costs you." There it was, the acknowledgement I'd been waiting 17 years to hear. Janet understood, at least partially, what I'd sacrificed to maintain my role as the family's domestic anchor. She recognized that my contributions came at a personal cost that no one bothered to calculate or appreciate. But recognition without action was just guilt management. Janet might feel bad about taking me for granted, but she wouldn't change her behavior. Next month, she'd still call with last-minute requests. She'd still bring guests to show off my cooking. She'd still expect me to accommodate everyone's preferences, without considering the burden that placed on me. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means more than you know." "Elena, there you are." Dorothy's voice carried from the living room. "Patricia wants to say goodbye, and she's insisting on getting that recipe before she leaves." I shared a look with Janet, the moment of honesty broken by familiar demands on my attention. Janet squeezed my shoulder sympathetically before returning to the living room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a kitchen full of dirty dishes. As I finished loading the dishwasher, I considered Janet's observations. If Marcus's sister had noticed changes in his behavior, others had probably noticed too. His distraction, his increased travel, his general detachment from family dynamics, these weren't invisible changes. They were obvious enough to prompt concern from people who cared about our marriage, which meant that when the truth about Marcus's affair eventually came to light, it wouldn't shock anyone. People would nod knowingly and say they'd suspected. Something was wrong. They'd express sympathy for me while secretly feeling validated in their observational skills. But they'd also judge Marcus harshly for his deception. In a family that valued stability and respectability above almost everything else, infidelity was a serious transgression. Dorothy might forgive her son eventually, but she'd never forget the embarrassment he'd caused. David and Janet would support him publicly while questioning his judgment privately. Marcus's affair wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a betrayal of family values, community expectations, and the professional image he'd worked so hard to build. When the truth emerged, the damage would ripple far beyond our personal relationship. I wiped down the counters and put away the last of the serving dishes, the kitchen finally restored to order after the evening's elaborate production. Through the window, I could see guests beginning to leave, their cars pulling out of our driveway with bellies full of my food and heads full of compliments for the wonderful evening Marcus had provided. Tomorrow, they'd return to their own lives, carrying positive impressions of the Donnelly family's hospitality and stability. They'd recommend Marcus's business to friends and colleagues. They'd speak well of him in social circles. They'd reinforce the reputation that made his professional success possible, but they'd never know that their positive impressions were built on a foundation of lies. They'd never realize that the stable, trustworthy businessman they admired was systematically betraying the woman who made his domestic perfection possible. At least, they wouldn't know until I decided it was time for them to learn the truth. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Marcus. Heading out to check. On the work site. Back in a couple hours. Thanks for an amazing dinner tonight. You're incredible. I stared at the message, noting the casual lie delivered with practiced ease. There was no work site to check at 9 o'clock on a Sunday evening. There was only Sophia, waiting for her, share of Marcus's attention, and probably eager to hear about the family dinner that had provided leftovers for her enjoyment. I typed back a simple response. Drive safely. Love you. Because I had loved him, once upon a time. Before he'd reduced me to a service provider. Before he'd started sharing the fruits of my labor with another woman. Before he'd made the catastrophic mistake of assuming I would continue accepting disrespect indefinitely. Marcus had no idea what he'd set in motion with his betrayal. He thought he was managing two separate relationships with skillful compartmentalization. He thought he could maintain his comfortable domestic life while pursuing excitement elsewhere. He was wrong. And tomorrow, I would begin teaching him exactly how wrong he was. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I'd always brought to my weekly routines. While Marcus showered, I prepared his breakfast and packed his lunch with the same meticulous care I'd shown for 17 years. Greek yogurt with homemade granola, fresh berries, and honey. A turkey sandwich on the sourdough bread I baked twice, weekly. An apple, a small container of mixed nuts, and 2 of the chocolate chip cookies I'd made over the weekend. Marcus appeared in the kitchen dressed in his best navy suit, the one he wore for important client meetings. His hair was still damp from the shower, and he smelled like the expensive cologne I'd given him for Christmas. Big day today? I asked, setting his coffee mug in the exact spot where he expected it. The biggest, he replied, genuinely excited. Final presentation for the Riverside project. If this goes well, Donnelly development will be set for the next 5 years. I watched him eat breakfast while scrolling through emails on his phone, preparing mentally for the most important business meeting of his career. The Riverside development represented everything Marcus had worked toward professionally. Success would establish him as a major player in commercial construction. Failure would set him back years, possibly permanently. I know you'll do great, I said, refilling his coffee cup. You've prepared for this for months. Thanks, babe. Having you in my corner makes all the difference. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. Don't wait up tonight. The presentation's at 2, but there'll probably be dinner afterward if things go well. After Marcus left, I sat in the quiet kitchen and opened my laptop. The contact database I'd reviewed yesterday now served a different purpose. Instead of planning entertainment for Marcus's business relationships, I was mapping the network that supported his professional success. First National Bank held the ED. Primary construction loan for the Riverside project. Thomas Chen, the commercial lending officer, had approved the financing after meeting Marcus at a dinner party I'd hosted 2 years ago. Chen's wife, Linda, had become a casual friend, someone I occasionally met for lunch or coffee. Linda had mentioned recently that Thomas was under pressure to reduce the bank's exposure to speculative real estate development. Morrison Architecture had designed the Riverside project. Principal architect Jennifer Morrison had selected Marcus as the contractor after we'd all served together on a charity committee last year. Jennifer and I had bonded over our shared frustration with the committee's disorganized approach to event planning. She'd complimented my organizational skills repeatedly and mentioned how rare it was to find contractors married to women who understood business. City Planning Commissioner Robert Hayes had expedited permits for the Riverside project. His wife, Susan, and I had worked together on the hospital auxiliary fundraiser, where I'd managed logistics while she'd handled sponsor relations. Susan had confided that Robert was considering running for city council and was particularly sensitive about any projects that might generate negative publicity. Each professional relationship in Marcus's network had a personal foundation that I'd helped create. Wives who trusted me, social connections that generated business opportunities, community relationships that opened doors and smoothed bureaucratic processes. Marcus saw these connections as the natural result of his professional competence and personal charm. He had no idea how carefully I'd cultivated the social soil that allowed his business relationships to flourish. And he certainly hadn't considered how quickly that soil could be poisoned if questions arose about his character and judgment. Opened a new document and began drafting what appeared to be a concerned email to Chen. The tone was perfect. Worried wife seeking advice from a trusted friend about troubling changes in her husband's behavior. Linda, I hope you're well. I've been hesitant to reach out about this, but I'm starting to worry about Marcus and wondered if Thomas had noticed anything unusual in their business interactions. Marcus has been working incredibly long hours lately, often claiming he's at job sites when I call and he doesn't answer. Last night he said he was checking on a work site at 9 p.m. on a Sunday, which seems odd even for him. I'm probably being paranoid, but I've heard that financial pressure can make people behave erratically. And with such a large project like Riverside, I worry about the stress he's under. Has Thomas mentioned anything about the project's status or Marcus's state of mind? I trust your judgment and would appreciate any insights. I saved the email as a draft without sending it. The message was carefully crafted to plant seeds of doubt about Marcus's reliability, while maintaining plausible deniability about my motives. If Linda shared my concerns with Thomas, he might start paying closer attention to Marcus's behavior and financial management. Questions about a contractor's personal stability could quickly translate into increased scrutiny of loan terms and project oversight. My phone rang, interrupting my strategic planning. The caller ID showed Jennifer Morrison's office number. Elena, good morning. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Jennifer. How are you? Rushed, as always. Listen, I'm calling because we need to finalize some details for the Riverside groundbreaking ceremony next month. I know Marcus is focused on today's presentation, but assuming that goes well, we'll need to start planning the public event. The groundbreaking ceremony. I'd forgotten about that component of the project timeline. A public celebration to mark the official start of construction, with city officials, investors, and community leaders in attendance. The kind of event that would showcase Marcus's achievement while reinforcing his reputation as a rising star in commercial development. What kind of planning are you thinking about? I asked. Nothing too elaborate, but it needs to feel significant. Maybe a small reception afterward? I know how talented you are with events, and frankly, having your touch would make everything more polished. Jennifer wanted me to plan Marcus's moment of professional triumph. The irony was almost beautiful. She was asking me to organize a celebration of the success I was simultaneously working to undermine. I'd be happy to help, I replied. Why don't we meet for coffee this week to discuss details? Perfect. And Elena, I hope you know how much I appreciate everything you do. Marcus is lucky to have such a supportive partner. Not many contractors. Wives understand the business side well enough to contribute meaningfully. After ending the call, I sat back and considered this unexpected opportunity. The groundbreaking ceremony would be a public showcase of Marcus's achievement, but it would also be a gathering of everyone whose support made his success possible. City officials who had expedited permits, bank officers who had approved financing, investors who had provided funding. community leaders who had endorsed the project. If questions about Marcus's character emerged before the ceremony, that celebration could transform into something entirely different. Instead of showcasing his achievement, it could become a public examination of his judgment and reliability. I returned to my laptop and opened a new email draft, this one to Susan Hayes, the planning commissioner's wife. Susan, I hope you and Robert are doing well. I wanted to reach out because I've been feeling increasingly concerned about Marcus lately, and I value your perspective as someone who understands the pressures of public life. Marcus has been behaving strangely for months, working excessive hours, traveling constantly, being secretive about his schedule. Last night he claimed he was inspecting a job site at 9 p.m. on a Sunday, which made no sense. I'm worried that the pressure of the Riverside project might be affecting his judgment in ways that could reflect poorly on everyone involved. Robert has been so supportive of this development, and I'd hate for any personal issues Marcus might be experiencing to create problems for the city. Do you think there's a tactful way to suggest that Robert keep a closer eye on project developments? I trust your discretion completely. Another carefully crafted message designed to introduce doubt while appearing to seek guidance. Susan Hayes was a consummate political wife who understood that her husband's reputation could be damaged by association with unreliable partners. If she became concerned about Marcus's stability, she would certainly alert Robert to pay closer attention to the Riverside project. My third email draft was to Margaret Foster, whose husband owned Foster Construction Supply, Marcus's primary source for building materials. Margaret and I had served together on multiple charity committees, and she'd always appreciated my organizational skills and attention to detail. Margaret, I hope you're enjoying the beautiful weather. I'm writing because I've become concerned about some changes in Marcus's behavior and wondered if Jim had noticed anything unusual in their business relationship. Marcus has been working obsessively long hours lately, often claiming to be at job sites when he's clearly not, and yesterday he told me he was checking on work at 9 p.m. on a Sunday evening. I'm starting to worry that the financial pressure of the Riverside project might be affecting his judgment. Jim has always been so good about extending credit terms for reliable contractors, and I'd hate for any personal issues Marcus might be experiencing to jeopardize that relationship. Has Jim mentioned anything about payment schedules or unusual requests? I value your friendship and trust your discretion. 3 strategic emails, each targeting a different aspect of Marcus's professional network. Banking relationships that controlled project financing. Municipal relationships that governed permits and approvals. Supplier relationships that determined material availability and credit terms. Each message was carefully worded to express concern rather than accusation, to seek advice rather than spread gossip. But each would plant questions about Marcus's reliability and judgment in the minds of people whose support was essential to his success. I saved all 3 emails as drafts and closed my laptop. The messages were ready to send, but timing would be crucial. Too early, and Marcus might have time to repair any damage before it became critical. Too late, and the Riverside project would be too far along to derail easily. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Can't wait to try those amazing dinner rolls Marcus promised to bring me. He said you make them from scratch with some kind of special herb butter? I stared at the message, marveling at her continued audacity. Not only was she comfortable texting me directly, but she was specifically requesting my food, treating me like a personal catering service for her affair with my husband. But Sophia's shameless behavior was actually helpful. Each interaction provided more documentation of her relationship with Marcus, more evidence of how casually they discussed sharing the fruits of my labor. I screenshotted the message and added it to my growing collection of evidence. Then I typed a response that surprised even me. The dinner rolls are one of my specialties. The herb butter includes rosemary and thyme from my garden, plus a touch of garlic. I hope you enjoy them. Let Sophia think I was oblivious to her affair. Let her believe she was successfully manipulating me into providing food for her relationship with my husband. Her overconfidence would make her careless, and careless people made mistakes that could be exploited. I spent the rest of the morning in my garden, tending to the herbs that would flavor tonight's dinner rolls. The physical work helped me think, and the symbolic appropriateness of cultivating plants that would be harvested for my own purposes felt satisfying. Marcus called at noon, his voice tight with pre-presentation nerves. "Hey, babe, just wanted to check in before the big meeting. I'm as ready as I'll ever be." "You're going to do great," I assured him. "Everyone who matters already believes in the project. Today is just making it official." "Thanks. I needed to hear that." His voice softened. "Elena, I know I've been distracted lately with work pressure. After this project gets approved, things will calm down. We should plan something special. Maybe that vacation we talked about." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, meaning it in ways he couldn't imagine. After the Riverside project collapsed and his professional reputation was in ruins, Marcus would have plenty of time for vacation. Of course, he probably wouldn't be able to afford it. "Love you, babe. Wish me luck." "Love you too. And Marcus? You don't need luck. You've got skill, preparation, and the best team in the business." After ending the call, I returned to my laptop and reviewed the 3 email drafts one more time. Each message was perfect, concerned, supportive, seeking guidance rather than spreading rumors. They would introduce doubt about Marcus's reliability without appearing malicious or vindictive. At exactly 2 o'clock, while Marcus was beginning his presentation to the Riverside project investors, I sent all 3 emails simultaneously. The seeds of doubt were now planted in the soil of Marcus's professional network. All that remained was to water them carefully and wait for the inevitable harvest. By evening, when Marcus returned home flushed with success from his approved presentation, the first cracks in his foundation would already be forming. He just wouldn't know it yet. Marcus burst through the front door at 7:30 that evening, his face glowing with triumph and his tie loosened in celebration. He swept me into his arms and spun me around the kitchen, laughing with pure joy. "Got it," he announced, setting me down but keeping his hands on my waist. "The Riverside project is officially approved. Full financing, construction permits expedited, groundbreaking scheduled for next month. Elena, this is it. This is everything we've worked for." I smiled and kissed him, tasting the champagne on his lips from whatever celebration dinner had followed. His successful presentation. "I'm so proud of you. Tell me everything." Marcus launched into an animated recounting of the afternoon's events while I prepared his dinner plate from the meal I'd kept warm. The presentation had gone flawlessly. The investors had been impressed not just with the project details, but with Marcus's professionalism and clear vision. The bank had confirmed final loan approval. City officials had praised the development's potential economic impact. "Thomas Chen pulled me aside afterward," Marcus continued, accepting the plate I handed him. "Said First National is interested in discussing future projects once Riverside is underway. And Jennifer Morrison mentioned they're considering me for lead contractor on a mixed-use development in the suburbs." I listened to his excitement while calculating how quickly his triumph could transform into disaster. The emails I'd sent this afternoon would need time to circulate and generate responses, but the groundwork was already laid for Marcus's professional relationships to begin unraveling. "That's wonderful news," I said, refilling his wine glass. "You've earned every bit of this success." My phone buzzed on the counter with an incoming call. Linda Chen's name appeared on the screen, right on schedule. "Excuse me for just a moment," I told Marcus. "Linda's calling." I stepped onto the back patio to take the call, maintaining the pretense of privacy while staying close enough for Marcus to hear if needed. "Elena, I got your email this afternoon," Linda said without preamble, her voice tight with concern. "I'm worried about what you described. Thomas came home tonight talking about how well Marcus's presentation went, but now I'm wondering if we should be paying closer attention to the personal side of things." "I feel terrible for even bringing it up," I replied, injecting appropriate guilt into my tone. I don't want to create problems for Marcus professionally. I'm probably just being paranoid. You're not being paranoid. Trust issues in a marriage can absolutely spill over into business relationships. Thomas needs to know if there are reliability concerns. Linda paused, clearly wrestling with conflicting loyalties. Has Marcus given you any reason to think there might be financial irregularities, unexplained expenses, changes in spending patterns? The question was perfect, exactly the direction I'd hoped the conversation would take. I honestly don't know. Marcus handles most of our finances, and I've tried to respect his privacy. But there have been expenses I don't understand. Expensive? Dinners charged to his business account when he claims to be working alone. Hotel bills for cities where he says he's meeting with suppliers. Elena, you need to start paying attention to those details. If Thomas is extending significant credit for this project and there are questions about Marcus's judgment. Linda's voice trailed off, the implications clear. What should I do? I asked, letting vulnerability creep into my voice. Document everything. Start reviewing credit card statements, bank records, anything you can access legally as his spouse, and keep me informed. Thomas has a responsibility to the bank's investors to ensure our contractors are stable and reliable. After ending the call, I returned to the kitchen where Marcus was finishing his dinner and scrolling through congratulatory emails on his phone. Everything okay? He asked, glancing up from his screen. Just Linda confirming lunch plans for this week. Nothing important. I began clearing his dishes, maintaining the domestic routine that had defined our relationship for 17 years. Marcus's phone rang, and he checked the caller ID with obvious pleasure. I should take this. It's Bill Morrison from the architectural firm. He stepped into his study for privacy, leaving me alone with the knowledge that my first strategic strike was already generating results. Linda Chen would share her concerns with Thomas, who would begin monitoring the Riverside project more closely. Questions about Marcus's personal stability would translate into increased scrutiny of his professional decisions. 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged from his study looking puzzled rather than celebratory. That was strange, he said, settling back at the kitchen island. Bill Morrison wanted to discuss project oversight protocols for Riverside. Said they're implementing additional check-in procedures to ensure everything stays on track. That sounds reasonable for such a large project, I observed, loading the dishwasher. I guess, but it felt like he was questioning my ability to manage the timeline, like he was worried about something specific. Marcus frowned, clearly unsettled by the shift in tone from his earlier celebration. He mentioned wanting to schedule weekly progress meetings instead of monthly ones. I paused in my cleaning, appearing to consider this development. Maybe the bank requested additional oversight as part of the loan approval? Large projects sometimes come with extra monitoring requirements. Maybe. Marcus didn't sound convinced. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. This afternoon, everyone was confident in my abilities. Tonight, they're talking about enhanced supervision. My phone buzzed with a text message from Susan Hayes. Elena, thank you for your email. Robert? And I discussed your concerns over dinner. He's going to request additional project updates from the contractor to ensure everything proceeds smoothly. Better safe than sorry with public projects. I showed Marcus the message, maintaining an expression of mild confusion. I had coffee with Susan last week and mentioned how hard you've been working. I hope I didn't say anything that caused problems. Marcus read the text twice, his frown deepening. What exactly did you tell her? Just that you've been under tremendous pressure with the project, working incredibly long hours. I was proud of your dedication, but I mentioned being worried about you burning out. I met his eyes with perfect sincerity. Did I overstep somehow? No, of course not. You were being supportive. Marcus handed back my phone, but his confusion was evident. It's just weird timing. First, Morrison wants enhanced oversight. Now the Planning Commission is requesting additional updates. It's like they're all suddenly worried about my ability to handle the project. I'm sure it's just standard procedure for projects this size. I reassured him. Everyone wants Riverside to succeed, so they're being extra careful. Marcus nodded, but I could see him mentally reviewing his interactions from the day, searching for clues about what might have triggered these sudden concerns. He would find nothing, because the seeds of doubt hadn't been planted during business meetings. They'd been cultivated through personal relationships, wife-to-wife conversations that operated below his professional radar. My laptop chimed with an incoming email. Margaret Foster had responded to my message with characteristic directness. Elena, your concerns are troubling. Jim mentioned that Marcus has been requesting extended payment terms more frequently lately, which is unusual for him. We'll keep a closer eye on account activity. If there are personal issues affecting his business judgment, we need to know sooner rather than later. I felt a surge of satisfaction reading Margaret's response. Foster Construction Supply provided materials for most of Marcus's projects, including Riverside. If they began scrutinizing his payment patterns or questioning his financial stability, it could trigger a cascade of supplier concerns that would complicate his ability to maintain current projects while pursuing new ones. Who was that? Marcus asked, noting my attention to the laptop. Margaret Foster, confirming our charity committee meeting next week. I closed the email without offering to show him, maintaining the boundary between his professional world and my social connections. Marcus's phone rang again, and this time his expression showed genuine concern when he saw the caller ID. It's Dave Rodriguez from Rodriguez Electric. We use them for all our commercial projects. He answered the call with forced cheerfulness, but I could see tension building in his shoulders as the conversation progressed. When he hung up 5 minutes later, he looked genuinely worried. Dave says they need to discuss payment terms for the Riverside electrical work, wants to meet tomorrow morning to clarify expectations before they commit to the timeline. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his response to stress. Elena, this is crazy. 6 hours ago, everyone was congratulating me on landing the biggest project of my career. Now it feels like they're all questioning my ability to deliver. That does seem odd, I agreed, moving to stand behind his chair and massage his tense shoulders. But maybe it's just the reality of big projects settling in. People get nervous when real money and timelines are involved. Marcus leaned into my touch, seeking comfort in the physical connection that had once been genuine between us. You're probably right. It's just a lot of pressure all at once. My phone rang, and Jennifer Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Marcus gestured for me to answer it, clearly hoping for reassurance from our social circle. Elena, I hope I'm not calling too late, Jennifer said, her voice carrying an edge of concern. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the groundbreaking ceremony. Given some conversations I've had today, I'm wondering if we should postpone the public event until we're certain everything is proceeding smoothly. Oh, I replied, injecting surprise into my voice. Is there a problem with the project timeline? Not exactly, but there have been some questions raised about oversight and management protocols. Nothing specific, just general concerns about ensuring such a large project maintains appropriate supervision. Jennifer paused. Has Marcus mentioned anything about additional oversight requirements? I glanced at Marcus, who was listening intently to my side of the conversation. He mentioned some changes in meeting schedules and reporting requirements. Standard stuff for large projects, I assumed. Probably, but I'd rather err on the side of caution with public events. The last thing we want is to celebrate prematurely if there are legitimate concerns about project management. After ending the call, I turned to find Marcus staring at me with growing alarm. They want to postpone the groundbreaking ceremony, I reported. Jennifer seems worried about project management concerns. Marcus stood abruptly, beginning to pace the kitchen. This is insane. What project management concerns? Everything was perfect this afternoon. The presentation was flawless. The financing is approved. Permits are expedited. What changed in 6 hours? I watched him struggle to understand the sudden shift in his professional relationships, knowing he would never suspect that his loving wife had orchestrated every doubt, every question, every concern that was now undermining his moment of triumph. Maybe someone raised questions during the post-presentation discussions, I suggested. You know how these business relationships work. One person expresses concern, and it spreads quickly. But what concern? What could anyone possibly be worried about? Marcus's voice rose with frustration. I've never missed a deadline, never gone over budget, never had a safety violation. My record is spotless. Your professional record is spotless, I corrected gently. But these are personal relationships too. Maybe someone heard something about stress in our marriage or work-life balance issues, and they're worried about how that might affect your performance. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. What could they have heard about stress in our marriage? I don't know. But you have been working incredibly long hours, traveling constantly, being secretive about your schedule. People notice things like that. I maintained eye contact, allowing him to see both concern and confusion in my expression. Yesterday you said you were checking a job site at 9 o'clock on a Sunday evening. That's not normal behavior, Marcus. The accusation hung between us, dressed as concerned observation, but carrying the weight of suspicion. Marcus's face went through several emotions before settling on defensive anger. I was checking on the site. There had been some vandalism reported in the area, and I wanted to make sure our equipment was secure. At 9 p.m. on a Sunday? I pressed gently. Wouldn't security issues be handled by the company we hired for overnight monitoring? Marcus's pause was too long, his explanation too rehearsed. We both knew he was lying, but this was the first time I'd challenged one of his fabrications directly. Elena, are you questioning my word? I'm trying to understand what other people might be questioning, I replied. If your professional contacts are suddenly concerned about oversight and management, something triggered those concerns. I'm just trying to figure out what it might have been. Marcus sat back down heavily, the weight of his situation beginning to register. His greatest professional triumph was being undermined by questions he couldn't answer and concerns he couldn't address, because the real source of those concerns was sitting in his kitchen, wearing his wife's face and maintaining his household, with the same efficiency she was using to destroy his career. What do I do? He asked finally, vulnerability replacing defensiveness. Tell the truth, I suggested. Whatever's causing these concerns, address them directly and honestly. That's the only way to rebuild confidence. But we both knew that telling the truth would destroy everything Marcus had worked to build. His affair with Sophia, his lies about work schedules, his casual betrayal of our marriage. None of that could be addressed honestly without confirming every concern his professional contacts were beginning to harbor. Marcus was trapped between the lies he'd told to cover his affair and the truth that would destroy his reputation. And I had orchestrated that trap with the same careful attention to detail I'd once devoted to planning his business dinners. The man who had taken my devotion for granted was about to learn what life looked like when that devotion transformed into strategic opposition. The next morning, Marcus left for his meeting with Dave Rodriguez looking like a man walking to his execution. His usual confidence had been replaced by nervous energy, and he'd checked his appearance in the hallway mirror 3 times before heading out the door. I watched him drive away, then immediately called Linda Chen. Elena, I'm glad you called, Linda said, her voice carrying the urgency I'd hoped to hear. Thomas and I talked more last night about your concerns, and we've decided he needs to have a direct conversation with Marcus about the personal issues you mentioned. Oh no, I replied, injecting appropriate alarm into my voice. I never meant for this to become a business issue. I was just worried about Marcus's well-being. Personal stability directly affects professional performance, especially on projects this large. Thomas can't ignore potential red flags. Linda paused. Elena, has Marcus given you access to your joint financial accounts? You mentioned unexplained, expenses, and I think you need to start documenting everything. I've always trusted Marcus to handle our finances, I said, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. But maybe it's time I started paying closer attention. It's definitely time. And Elena, if you discover anything concerning, you need to tell Thomas immediately. The bank has a fiduciary responsibility to protect its investment. After ending the call, I opened my laptop and logged into our joint checking account for the first time in months. Marcus had always managed our finances, claiming it was easier for one person to handle bills and budgeting. I'd accepted this arrangement because it freed me to focus on domestic responsibilities, but now I saw it as another way he'd maintained control while keeping me dependent and uninformed. The account history revealed exactly what I'd expected to find. Expensive restaurant charges for meals I hadn't attended, hotel bills for business trips that had never been mentioned to me, florist charges for flowers I'd never received, gift purchases from jewelry stores and boutiques I'd never visited. Marcus had been funding his affair with Sophia using our joint resources, probably justifying it as business entertainment or necessary expenses for client relations. The amounts weren't enormous individually, but they accumulated to several $1,000s over the past 6 months. Money that should have been invested in our future had instead been used to romance another woman. I printed detailed statements showing the suspicious charges, highlighting patterns that would be obvious to anyone looking for evidence of personal misconduct. Then I scanned the documents and saved them in a secure cloud folder, creating a backup that Marcus couldn't access or delete. My phone rang just as I finished organizing the financial evidence. Margaret Foster's voice was crisp with businesslike concern. Elena, Jim met with Marcus this morning about payment terms for the Riverside project. I thought you should know that the meeting didn't go well. What happened? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Marcus became defensive when Jim asked about his recent requests for extended payment schedules, started making excuses about cash flow timing and project complexity. But Jim's been in this business for 30 years, and he knows the difference between legitimate payment delays and financial instability. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Marcus's defensive reaction would only confirm Jim Foster's growing suspicions about his reliability. That doesn't sound like Marcus. He's usually very straightforward about business matters. That's exactly what concerned Jim. Marcus seemed evasive, almost secretive about why his payment patterns have changed. And when Jim mentioned that other suppliers had expressed similar concerns, Marcus got angry and accused people of spreading rumors. Perfect. Marcus's anger would be interpreted as guilt, his defensiveness as confirmation that he was hiding something significant. I'm worried about him, Margaret. This kind of behavior isn't normal for Marcus. Jim thinks it might be time to require upfront payment for materials rather than extending credit. He can't risk having thousands of dollars tied up in supplies if there are questions about the contractor's stability. I understand completely. You have to protect your business. After Margaret hung up, I sat back and reviewed the morning's developments. Marcus's meeting with Rodriguez Electric had apparently gone poorly, triggering concerns among other suppliers about his changed behavior. His defensive reactions were confirming rather than alleviating the doubts I'd planted about his personal stability. The strategy was working exactly as planned. Each expression of concern prompted defensive behavior from Marcus, which in turn generated more concern from his professional contacts. The cycle would continue escalating until his entire support network questioned his judgment and reliability. My laptop chimed with an email from Thomas Chen requesting a meeting to discuss confidential concerns regarding the Riverside project contractor. The message was professional but ominous, clearly indicating that Marcus's banking relationship was about to undergo serious scrutiny. I responded immediately, agreeing to meet Thomas that afternoon at a coffee shop near the bank. The setting would be private enough for sensitive conversation, while public enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. Marcus returned home at noon, looking haggard and frustrated. He found me in the kitchen preparing lunch, moving through familiar routines that had once brought me satisfaction but now felt like performance art. "How did the meeting go?" I asked, not looking up from the sandwich I was assembling. "Terrible. Dave Rodriguez is suddenly worried about payment schedules for electrical work. Wants everything confirmed in writing with penalty clauses for late payment. Acts like I'm some kind of financial risk after 15 years of reliable business." Marcus slumped into a chair at the kitchen island, his frustration evident in every line of his body. "And Jim Foster is requiring upfront payment for materials instead of the credit terms we've used for years. Says it's just business policy. But I know it's because someone's been spreading concerns about my stability." "That seems extreme," I observed, setting his lunch in front of him. "What could have prompted such dramatic changes?" "That's what I'd like to know. Yesterday I was the golden boy with the biggest project approval in company history. Today everyone's treating me like I'm about to declare bankruptcy." I poured him a glass of iced tea and sat across from him, projecting supportive concern while calculating my next moves. "Maybe you should ask directly what's driving these changes. If there are specific concerns, you can address them." I tried. That with Jim Foster. He claimed it was just routine policy review, but then mentioned that multiple sources had raised questions about my recent behavior patterns. Marcus looked up from his untouched sandwich. "Elena, what could people be saying about my behavior patterns?" The question provided an opening I'd been waiting for. "Well, you have been working unusual hours lately, and you've been secretive about your schedule in ways that might seem suspicious to people who don't know you well." "Secretive how?" "Sunday night you said you were checking on a job site at 9 p.m. Yesterday you mentioned a client dinner that required you to stay out until midnight, but when I tried to call, your phone went straight to voicemail for hours." I maintained gentle, concerned eye contact. "To someone on the outside, that might look like you're hiding something." Marcus's face went through several expressions before settling on careful neutrality. "My phone battery died during dinner, and the job site visit was legitimate security concern." "I believe you," I said, though my tone suggested otherwise. "But if other people are questioning your whereabouts and getting defensive answers, they might start wondering what you're really doing with your time." "Are you questioning what I'm doing with my time?" The direct challenge hung between us, a moment of truth that would determine how this confrontation developed. I could continue playing the supportive but concerned wife, or I could reveal that I knew exactly what he was doing with his time. "I'm trying to understand why your professional relationships are suddenly falling apart," I replied carefully. "Yesterday, you had the support of your entire network. Today, they're all implementing new oversight procedures and questioning your reliability. Something triggered that change." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, clearly calculating how much he could safely reveal. "There have been some personal stresses lately that might be affecting my professional demeanor. Nothing that would impact my work quality, but maybe people are picking up on the tension." "What kind of personal stresses?" Another pause, longer this time. Marcus was clearly wrestling with how to explain his changed behavior without revealing his affair. "Work pressure has been intense with the Riverside project. It's created some strain in our marriage, some distance between us. Maybe people are sensing that tension." The admission was carefully crafted to acknowledge problems while avoiding responsibility for creating them. Marcus was presenting himself as a victim of work stress rather than the architect of his own domestic betrayal. "I haven't felt distance between us," I said quietly. "I've felt like you were living a separate life that didn't include me. There's a difference." Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text, and he glanced at it automatically. I caught a glimpse of Sophia's name before he quickly turned the screen away, but not before his expression softened with the same affection that used to be reserved for me. "Who was that?" I asked, though I already knew. "Work. Nothing urgent." Marcus stood abruptly, clearly wanting to escape this conversation. "I need to make some calls about the supplier situation. Try to figure out what's really driving these sudden policy changes." "Marcus." My voice stopped him at the kitchen doorway. When you figure out what's driving the changes, you might want to consider whether the problem is with other people's perceptions or with the behavior that's creating those perceptions. He looked back at me with something that might have been recognition, as if he was finally seeing me as something other than a domestic convenience. But instead of acknowledgement or apology, I saw calculation in his eyes, as if he was assessing whether I posed a threat to his carefully compartmentalized life. "I'll handle the business issues," he said finally. "You don't need to worry about supplier relationships or bank policies." After Marcus disappeared into his study, I gathered my purse and car keys. My meeting with Chen would provide another opportunity to plant concerns about Marcus's stability while maintaining my image as a worried wife seeking guidance. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide conversational cover, but quiet enough for sensitive discussion. Chen arrived promptly at 2:00, looking every inch the concerned bank officer in his conservative suit and serious expression. "Elena, thank you for meeting with me on short notice. I know this is an awkward situation. I appreciate you taking my concerns seriously," I replied, accepting the coffee he'd purchased for me. "I've been struggling with whether to say anything at all. Your email yesterday raised some troubling questions about Marcus's recent behavior. As the primary lender for the Riverside project, I have a responsibility to ensure our contractor remains stable and reliable throughout the construction period." Thomas leaned forward, his expression professionally sympathetic. "Can you tell me more specifically about the changes you've observed in Marcus's behavior?" I spent the next 20 minutes providing carefully selected details about Marcus's secretive schedule, unexplained absences, and defensive reactions to questions about his whereabouts. I showed Thomas the printed bank statements highlighting suspicious charges, presenting them as evidence of my growing concern rather than calculated investigation. "These restaurant and hotel charges," Thomas observed, studying the documents. "They don't match any business travel or client entertainment that Marcus has mentioned to me." "That's what worries me," I replied. "Either Marcus is being dishonest with you about his business activities, or he's being dishonest with me about what these charges represent." Thomas nodded grimly. "Either way, it raises questions about his judgment and transparency. Large construction loans require complete financial disclosure, and if Marcus is hiding expenses or misrepresenting his business activities, what does this mean for the Riverside project?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "It means we need to implement additional oversight measures immediately. More frequent financial reporting, stricter approval processes for expense reimbursements, possibly requiring a project manager to provide independent verification of progress and expenditures. The increased oversight would be exactly the kind of micromanagement that would frustrate Marcus and confirm his professional contacts' growing doubts about his competence. Each additional requirement would feel like punishment for crimes he couldn't acknowledge, creating a spiral of defensive behavior that would further undermine confidence in his stability. "I hope I'm not overreacting," I said, projecting appropriate guilt about potentially damaging my husband's career. "You're protecting everyone's interests, including Marcus's," Thomas assured me. "If there are legitimate explanations for these concerns, increased oversight will actually help clear the air. If there aren't," he left the implications unspoken. After the meeting, I drove home with the satisfaction of knowing that Marcus's financial lifeline was about to become significantly more restrictive. The increased bank oversight would create operational challenges that would ripple through every aspect of the Riverside project, from supplier relationships to subcontractor coordination. Marcus had no idea that his comfortable assumptions about financial privacy and professional autonomy were about to be systematically dismantled by the woman he'd taken for granted for 17 years. Tonight, when he returned home expecting his usual supportive dinner and domestic tranquility, he would find me waiting with questions he couldn't answer and concerns he couldn't dismiss. The man who had casually shared the fruits of my labor with his mistress was about to discover what it felt like when that labor was redirected toward strategic opposition rather than supportive partnership. Marcus returned home that evening carrying the weight of a day that had systematically dismantled his professional confidence. I heard his car in the driveway at 6:15, followed by the heavy footsteps of a man whose world was shifting beneath his feet in ways he couldn't understand. He found me in the dining room, setting the table for two with our good china and crystal stemware. Candles flickered in silver holders, and a bottle of his favorite wine sat breathing on the sideboard. The scene looked romantic, intimate, like a carefully orchestrated attempt to recapture the closeness that had once defined our marriage. "This is beautiful," Marcus said, genuine surprise in his voice. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion. I just thought we should have a proper dinner together. It feels like we haven't really talked in weeks." I smiled at him with what appeared to be loving concern. "You've seemed so stressed lately, and I want to help however I can." Marcus loosened his tie and accepted the glass of wine I offered, his expression softening with what might have been relief. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd married 20 years ago, before success and entitlement had transformed him into someone who took my devotion for granted. "Today was brutal," he admitted, sinking into his chair as I brought the first course from the kitchen. "It's like everyone in my professional network suddenly decided I'm unreliable. Thomas Chen called a meeting for tomorrow to discuss enhanced project oversight. Jennifer Morrison wants weekly progress reports instead of monthly ones. Even my insurance agent is reviewing my policy terms." I served the soup I'd prepared, butternut squash with sage, one of his favorites, and settled across from him with practiced sympathy. "That does sound overwhelming. What do you think triggered all this sudden concern?" "That's what I can't figure out. Yesterday I was on top of the world. Today I'm being treated like a potential liability." Marcus tasted the soup and nodded appreciatively. "This is incredible, as always. At least I can count on you to make everything feel normal." Normal. The word sat bitter in my mouth as I watched him enjoy the meal I'd prepared with the same meticulous care I'd once devoted to loving him. There was nothing normal about sitting across from my husband while systematically destroying his career, but Marcus remained oblivious to the irony. "Maybe the concerns aren't really about your professional competence," I suggested carefully. "Maybe they're about personal stability. People in business relationships want to feel confident that their partners aren't dealing with distracting personal issues." Marcus paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. "What kind of personal issues would they be concerned about?" "I don't know. Marriage problems, financial stress, health issues, the kind of things that can affect someone's judgment or reliability." I met his eyes across the candlelit table. "Is there anything like that going on that might be influencing how people perceive you?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications that Marcus couldn't address, without revealing truths he wasn't prepared to share. I watched him calculate his response, weighing honesty against self-preservation. "Our marriage has been under some strain lately," he finally admitted. "The pressure of the Riverside project, the long hours, the travel. Maybe I've been distracted or short-tempered in ways that people have noticed." "What kind of strain?" I pressed gently. Marcus set down his spoon and reached for his wine glass, using the pause to carefully construct his answer. "I know I haven't been as present as I should be. Haven't been as attentive to you, to our relationship. The business expansion has consumed so much energy that I've probably neglected other priorities." The admission was artfully crafted to acknowledge problems, while positioning himself as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of betrayal. He was confessing to being a workaholic while hiding the fact that his distraction had nothing to do with business pressure and everything to do with his affair with Sophia. "I've felt that neglect," I said quietly. "But I assumed it was temporary, something that would resolve once the project was approved. It will be. After Riverside gets going, I'll have more time for us, for our marriage. We can take that vacation we talked about, spend some real time reconnecting." Marcus reached across the table to cover my hand with his. I know I've been asking a lot of you lately, taking your support for granted. That's going to change. His touch felt like a performance, a gesture calculated to maintain domestic stability while he continued his deception. The promise of future attention was meaningless, coming from a man who was already sharing his emotional and physical intimacy with another woman. What if the professional concerns don't resolve themselves? I asked. What if the enhanced oversight and changed relationships become permanent? Marcus's expression darkened. Then I'll have to figure out who's been spreading doubts about my reliability and address the problem directly. Someone has been talking, creating suspicions where none should exist. Talking about what? About my behavior, my schedule, my personal life. The questions I'm getting aren't based on professional performance. They're based on speculation about my character and stability. Marcus's frustration was building toward anger. Someone has been sharing private observations about our marriage, about my work habits, about things that should be confidential. The accusation was getting dangerously close to the truth, but I maintained an expression of concerned confusion. Who would do something like that? And what would they be saying? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. This kind of character, assassination, doesn't happen in a vacuum. Someone with access to personal information has been planting seeds of doubt in professional relationships. Marcus pulled his hand away from mine and leaned back in his chair, studying my face with new intensity. For a moment, I wondered if he was beginning to suspect that his loving wife might be responsible for his professional difficulties. Elena, he said slowly, have you talked to anyone about our marriage lately? About the strain you mentioned, or concerns about my behavior? The direct question required careful handling. I could deny everything and maintain my cover, or I could acknowledge limited discussions while appearing innocent of malicious intent. I might have mentioned to Linda, Chen, that you've been working long hours and seem stressed, I admitted. And I think I told Susan Hayes that you've been traveling more frequently. Just casual conversation, expressing concern about your well-being. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What exactly did you tell them? Nothing specific, just that you've been under pressure and I've been worried about you burning out. I kept my voice steady, projecting hurt that he would question my loyalty. Marcus, you're not suggesting that I would intentionally damage your professional relationships? No, of course not. But Linda Chen's husband is my primary banker, and Susan Hayes' husband controls city planning approvals. Even casual comments from you could be misinterpreted or taken out of context. I was expressing concern about my husband to friends. I didn't realize that caring about your well-being could be construed as professional sabotage. The hurt in my voice was genuine, though not for the reasons Marcus assumed. I was hurt by 20 years of taking my devotion for granted, by months of lies and betrayal, by the casual assumption that I would continue providing support while he pursued another woman. I'm sorry, Marcus said quickly, recognizing that he'd overstepped. I didn't mean to suggest you would intentionally cause problems. I'm just trying to understand how personal conversations became professional concerns. My phone buzzed with an incoming text, and I glanced at the screen to find another message from Sophia. Marcus promised to bring dessert tonight. Should I make coffee for after dinner? Can't wait to try more of your amazing cooking. I stared at the message, processing the implications with cold calculation. Marcus had promised to bring Sophia dessert from our romantic dinner, planning to leave me after this intimate evening to share my cooking with his mistress. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Everything okay? Marcus asked, noting my attention to the phone. Just a wrong number, I replied, deleting the message while screenshotting it for my evidence collection. Where were we? Trying to figure out how to address the professional concerns that are suddenly undermining the biggest project of my career. Marcus's frustration was returning, mixed with genuine confusion about how his triumph had transformed so quickly into crisis. Maybe the solution isn't figuring out who's been talking, I suggested. Maybe it's addressing whatever behaviors have given people reason to be concerned. What behaviors? Working hard? Being dedicated to my projects? Building a successful business? Being secretive about your schedule? Claiming to work at times and places that don't make sense? Becoming defensive when people ask reasonable questions about your whereabouts? I paused, letting the implications sink in. Marcus, you told me you were checking a job site at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. When people hear things like that, they wonder what you're really doing. Marcus's face flushed with anger or embarrassment. So you did tell people about Sunday night. I mentioned being concerned about your work-life balance. The specific example may have come up as illustration of how consumed you've become with work. I maintained steady eye contact. Was I wrong to be concerned? The question trapped Marcus between competing lies. He couldn't admit that his Sunday evening absence had nothing to do with work without revealing his affair. But he also couldn't maintain his fabrication about job site security without sounding increasingly paranoid and defensive. The job site visit was legitimate, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Then you should have no problem explaining that to your professional contacts when they ask about your reliability. I stood to clear the soup bowls, projecting calm support while internally celebrating his obvious discomfort. Transparency usually resolves concerns better than defensiveness. While I prepared the main course in the kitchen, I could hear Marcus on the phone in the dining room, his voice tight with controlled frustration as he spoke to someone about unfounded concerns and professional jealousy. His defensive tone would only confirm whatever doubts his business contacts were harboring about his stability and judgment. I returned with plates of herb-crusted chicken and roasted vegetables, continuing our conversation as if we were simply discussing his professional challenges rather than my systematic destruction of his career. Any progress on resolving the concerns? I asked, setting his plate before him. I talked to Bill Morrison about the enhanced oversight requirements. He claims they're just standard procedure for large projects, but he also mentioned that several wives in our social circle have expressed concerns about contractors working excessive hours and neglecting their families. Perfect! My carefully planted seeds were cross-pollinating through the network of professional wives who managed their husbands' social relationships. Concerns shared over coffee and charity committee meetings were translating into business policy, changes that would make Marcus's work life increasingly difficult. That's interesting, I observed. Which wives expressed concerns? He didn't specify, but he mentioned that successful contractors need stable home lives to maintain professional effectiveness. Said the architecture firm has started considering domestic stability as a factor in contractor selection. Marcus cut into his chicken with more force than necessary, his frustration evident in every movement. 20 years of perfect professional performance, and suddenly everyone's worried about my home life. Maybe because your home life has changed, I suggested quietly. Maybe because the stability that used to support your professional success isn't as reliable as it once was. Marcus looked up from his plate, studying my face with new intensity. What do you mean by that? I mean that successful partnerships require mutual trust and transparency. When one partner starts living a separate life, hiding activities and lying about whereabouts, the foundation becomes unstable. I met his gaze directly. And instability at home inevitably affects performance at work. The accusation was clear but carefully worded, allowing Marcus to interpret it as general observation rather than specific knowledge of his affair. I watched him process the implications, weighing how much he could safely acknowledge. Elena, are you saying you don't trust me? I'm saying that trust requires honesty, and honesty has been in short supply lately. I continued eating calmly while he wrestled with how to respond. When you tell me you're checking job sites at 9 p.m. on Sunday, or working late at places where your phone doesn't work, it becomes difficult to maintain the assumption that you're being completely truthful. Marcus set down his fork, clearly realizing that this conversation had moved beyond discussing his professional difficulties to examining the personal deceptions that had created them. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm explaining why people might be questioning your stability and reliability." I smiled at him with practiced warmth. "But if you're feeling defensive about your behavior, maybe that's something worth examining." The trap was perfect. Marcus couldn't defend his lies without revealing them, but his defensive reaction would confirm that he was indeed hiding something significant. Either way, his guilt would be evident in his response. As we sat in candle-lit silence, both of us calculating our next moves, I realized that this dinner represented the end of our marriage in everything but legal terms. Marcus might not understand yet what was happening to his professional life, but he was beginning to recognize that his domestic foundation was no longer as secure as he'd assumed. The woman who had provided unwavering support for 17 years was finally asking questions he couldn't answer honestly. And soon, very soon, he would discover that those questions were just the beginning of his problems. Marcus excused himself after dinner, claiming he needed to review project documents in his study, but I could see through the kitchen window that he was pacing the back patio while talking on his phone. His animated gestures and the way he kept running his hand through his hair told me the conversation wasn't going well, whatever business crisis he was trying to manage. I finished cleaning the dinner dishes and wiped down the counters, maintaining the domestic routines that had defined my role for 17 years while planning the next phase of Marcus's professional destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Morrison. "Elena, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow?" "Morning?" "There are some concerns about the Riverside project that require delicate handling." "Perfect." Jennifer's request confirmed that my strategic conversations were generating exactly the kind of professional scrutiny I'd intended. As the lead architect, her concerns would carry significant weight with investors and city officials. I was arranging tomorrow's schedule when Marcus burst through the patio door, his face flushed with anger and his phone clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "That was Dave Rodriguez," he announced without preamble. "He's pulling his electrical crew from the Riverside project unless we agree to a payment structure that essentially treats me like a bankruptcy risk." I turned from the sink, projecting appropriate surprise and concern. "That seems extreme. What's driving such a dramatic change in his payment requirements?" "He claims other contractors have been sharing concerns about my financial stability and project management capabilities. Says he can't afford to extend credit to someone whose reliability is being questioned by multiple sources." Marcus began pacing the kitchen, his frustration evident in every movement. "Elena, someone has been systematically undermining my professional relationships. This isn't coincidence or business caution. This is coordinated character assassination." The accusation was getting closer to the truth, but I maintained an expression of confused concern. "Who would do something like that? And why?" "I don't know who, but I'm starting to understand why. The Riverside project represents a major shift in the commercial construction landscape. If I succeed with this development, Donnelly Development becomes a serious competitor for other contractors who've dominated the market for years." Marcus was creating conspiracy theories to explain his professional difficulties, unable to imagine that his loving wife might be orchestrating his downfall. The explanation felt more comfortable than acknowledging that his own behavior had created legitimate concerns about his judgment and reliability. "That sounds paranoid," I observed gently. "Are you sure there isn't a simpler explanation? Maybe people are genuinely concerned about something they've observed in your behavior or business practices." "Like what? I've never missed a deadline, never gone over budget, never had a safety violation. My professional record is spotless." Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me with growing suspicion. "Unless someone has been sharing private information about our personal life to create doubts about my stability." The accusation hung between us, more direct than his earlier questioning, but still carefully worded to avoid outright confrontation. Marcus was beginning to suspect that I might be involved in his professional difficulties, but he couldn't bring himself to directly accuse the wife who had supported him unconditionally for nearly 2 decades. Marcus, are you suggesting that I would sabotage your career? I'm suggesting that concerned comments from a contractor's wife can be misinterpreted by people who don't understand the context. When you tell Linda Chen that I'm working strange hours or behaving secretively, that information gets filtered through her husband's professional judgment. So I should lie to my friends about concerns regarding my husband's well-being? I kept my voice level, projecting hurt rather than defensiveness. I should pretend everything is perfect when you're clearly under tremendous stress? You should consider how your observations might be interpreted by people who make decisions about my professional future. Marcus's tone was becoming more aggressive, his frustration overriding his usual caution about confronting me directly. My phone rang, interrupting the escalating tension. Susan Hayes's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with deliberate casualness while maintaining eye contact with Marcus. "Elena, I hope I'm not calling too late," Susan said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Robert wanted me to reach out about some concerns that have come to his attention regarding the Riverside project." "Of course. What kind of concerns?" "There have been questions raised about the contractor's personal stability and project management capabilities. Nothing specific, but enough concern from multiple sources that Robert feels the city needs to implement additional oversight measures." Marcus was listening intently to my side of the conversation, his expression growing darker with each word. I could see him calculating how this call might relate to his suspicions about my role in his professional difficulties. "I see. What kind of oversight measures? More frequent progress reports? Independent verification of expenditures? Possibly. A city-appointed project supervisor to ensure everything proceeds according to plan. Robert doesn't want to be caught off guard if there are legitimate problems with contractor performance." After ending the call, I turned to find Marcus staring at me with barely contained fury. "Let me guess," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The city is implementing enhanced oversight because Robert Hayes has heard concerning reports about my personal stability." "That seems to be the situation," I confirmed, maintaining an expression of sympathetic confusion. "Marcus, what's happening here? Why is everyone suddenly questioning your capabilities?" "Because someone has been systematically planting doubts in the minds of everyone who matters to my professional success. Someone with intimate knowledge of my schedule and behavior. Someone whose concerns would be taken seriously by wives who influence their husbands' business decisions." The accusation was explicit now, barely disguised behind theoretical language. Marcus was finally recognizing that his domestic foundation had become the source of his professional destruction, though he still couldn't quite accept that I had orchestrated it deliberately. "Are you accusing me of deliberately damaging your career?" "I'm saying that your expressions of concern have had professional consequences that maybe you didn't anticipate." Marcus was trying to walk back his accusation while still making his point. "But the timing is suspicious. These concerns emerged immediately after I achieved the biggest success of my career. Maybe the success highlighted existing problems that people had been politely ignoring," I suggested. "When someone becomes responsible for a major public project, their personal stability becomes a legitimate concern for everyone involved." "What problems?" Marcus demanded. "What personal instability are people supposedly observing?" The question provided an opening I'd been maneuvering toward all evening. Marcus was finally asking directly about the behaviors that had created legitimate concerns about his judgment and reliability. The secretive schedule, the defensive reactions to reasonable questions, the lies about where you've been and what you've been doing. I met his eyes steadily. "Marcus, you told me you were checking a job site at 9 p.m. on Sunday night. When I tried to call you during your supposed client dinner Tuesday, your phone went straight to voicemail for 4 hours. Yesterday you claimed to be meeting with suppliers in a city where you've never done business." Each observation was accurate and damning, evidence of the deception he'd been practicing for months to cover his affair with Sophia. Marcus couldn't defend these lies without revealing the truth, but his inability to defend them confirmed their significance. "So you have been documenting my behavior and sharing those observations with people who control my professional future." "I've been concerned about my husband and seeking advice from friends about changes in his behavior that worry me." I maintained steady eye contact. "If those concerns have professional implications, maybe the problem is with the behavior, not with my decision to seek support." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, clearly struggling to reconcile his image of me as a supportive wife with the growing evidence that I was actively undermining his career. The cognitive dissonance was written across his face as he processed the possibility that his domestic anchor had become his greatest threat. "Elena, what do you want from me?" The question was loaded with exhaustion and growing recognition that his comfortable assumptions about our relationship were no longer valid. For the first time in our conversation, Marcus seemed to grasp that I might be acting from a position of knowledge rather than innocent concern. "I want honesty," I replied simply. "I want to understand why my husband has been lying to me for months about his whereabouts and activities. I want to know why you're sharing intimate dinners with someone who texts me to thank for the food I've prepared." Marcus's face went white as the implications of my words registered. I could see him calculating how much I knew, how long I'd been aware of his deception, what evidence I might have gathered. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Sophia. I'm talking about the restaurant charges for meals I didn't attend, and hotel bills for trips I wasn't told about. I'm talking about the woman who texts me directly to compliment my cooking, because she's so comfortable with her role in your life." The confrontation I'd been building toward for weeks was finally happening, but not in the explosive manner Marcus might have expected. Instead of tears or hysteria, I was presenting facts, with the same calm efficiency I brought to meal planning and household management. "Elena, I can explain—" "You can't explain lies, Marcus. You can only acknowledge them and accept the consequences." I moved to the kitchen island and opened my laptop, pulling up the evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. Bank statements, showing charges for dinners and hotels I knew nothing about. Text messages from Sophia thanking me for food you've been sharing with her. Financial records documenting months of using our joint resources to fund your affair. Marcus stared at the screen, seeing the careful documentation of his betrayal laid out with the same attention to detail I'd once devoted to managing his professional entertainment and social obligations. "How long have you known?" "Weeks. Long. Enough to understand that you've been lying to me while expecting me to continue providing the domestic stability that supports your professional success." I closed the laptop and studied his face. "Long enough to realize that your affair isn't just a betrayal of our marriage, it's a demonstration of judgment so poor that it calls into question your ability to manage a major construction project." The connection between his personal deception and professional concerns was finally explicit. Marcus could no longer pretend that his private life had no bearing on his business relationships, or that my growing awareness of his affair was separate from the professional difficulties he was experiencing. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect myself and my interests," I replied calmly. "I'm going to make sure that when this marriage ends, I'm not left financially vulnerable because I trusted someone whose word proved worthless." "Elena, we don't have to end the marriage. This thing with Sophia, it's not serious, it's just what? A casual betrayal of everything we've built together? A minor breach of trust that I should overlook because it's convenient for you?" Marcus moved toward me, his expression shifting from defensiveness to desperate placation. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake that I regret completely. But we can work through this. We can rebuild the trust." "With what foundation?" I interrupted. "Trust requires honesty, and you've been lying to me for months while expecting me to continue providing support for your professional and personal life. You've been sharing the fruits of my labor with another woman while taking my devotion for granted. I know I've made mistakes, but destroying my career won't fix our marriage." I'm not destroying your career, Marcus. I'm simply stopping my active support for it. The difference is that you've become so dependent on my contributions that withdrawal of support feels like sabotage. The truth was finally out in the open between us. Marcus could no longer maintain the fiction that his professional success was entirely his own achievement, independent of the social and domestic foundation I'd provided. And I could no longer pretend that continuing to support someone who had betrayed me so casually was anything other than enabling my own exploitation. What happens now? Marcus asked quietly. Now you deal with the consequences of your choices, I replied. The professional relationships you've damaged through your deception and defensive behavior. The financial oversight that your suspicious activities have triggered. The questions about your judgment and reliability that your affair has created. Marcus slumped against the kitchen counter, finally understanding that his comfortable life of compartmentalized deception was collapsing around him. The woman he'd taken for granted was no longer willing to provide unconditional support, while he pursued his own interests without regard for her welfare. For 17 years, I had been his greatest asset. Now, for the first time in our relationship, Marcus was beginning to understand what it meant to have me as an opponent instead of an ally. 6 months later, I sat in my new downtown office, reviewing proposals for the grand opening of Elena's Events, the boutique planning company I'd launched with my divorce settlement. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's professional collapse had provided the capital for my new beginning. The Riverside project had been canceled after mounting concerns about contractor reliability led to a cascade of insurance and financing withdrawals. Marcus's reputation never recovered from the scrutiny that revealed not just his affair, but the pattern of deception that had undermined every professional relationship he'd cultivated. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Morrison. Elena, my client needs an event planner for their corporate launch. Interested? I smiled, typing back my acceptance. The same professional network that had once supported Marcus's career now eagerly sought my services. Turns out, the wives who had been impressed by my domestic skills for 17 years were delighted to recommend me for their own events once they learned I was available. Sophia had disappeared from Marcus's life the moment his financial prospects dimmed. Apparently, her appreciation for my cooking hadn't extended to supporting a man facing bankruptcy and professional ruin. Marcus now worked for a small residential contractor, building the kind of modest renovations he'd started with 20 years ago. He'd tried to reconcile after losing everything, but some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. I'd discovered that revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about consequences. For 17 years, I'd enabled Marcus to take my contributions for granted while building his success on my unacknowledged labor. When I stopped enabling and started expecting accountability, his house of cards collapsed under its own weight. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We share powerful stories of people who refuse to be underestimated every week. Drop a comment below about a time you found your strength in an unexpected moment. Your story might inspire our next video.